Welcome, everyone, to the latest edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by BetRivers. Coming up on today's podcast, I talk with Field Yates of ESPN about the Browns, the AFC North, the NFL, the schedule, and fantasy football. That's all coming up on the latest edition of the Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by BetRivers.
You're watching Adam the Bull on the BetRivers Network.
Before we bring in Field Yates, a couple things I wanted to hit on real quick. First of all, make sure that you check out the BetRivers app, which is awesome. BetRivers app has the oh-so-close parlay insurance during the NBA playoffs. Place a parlay of 4 or more legs on an NBA playoff game each day. You get part of your stake back in bonus bets if you're exactly 1 leg short of hitting your parlay. The insurance is valid on your first NBA parlay of the day. See the BetRivers app for more details and to see how much stake back you are eligible for. Before we get to football, we're doing a lot of football today with Field Yates. Just want to spend a few minutes on the Guardians, who, after their 9-game winning streak came to an end 2 nights ago, got back on the winning track yesterday. A 13-7 barn burner against the Rockies in Colorado to get back to 19 games over 500. Guardians were up 2-0. Rockies tied it at 2. They were up 4-2. The Rockies tied it at 4. They were up 7-4. The Rockies tied it at 7. And then the Guardians scored 3 in the 7th, 3 in the 8th. Pitching's not been great the last 2 days, at least the starters. Obviously, Xavier Curry had a bad game on Monday, and Tristan McKenzie did not pitch well yesterday, although he did have 9 strikeouts in 5 innings, but he allowed 9 base runners, 4 homers, and the home run ball has really bit him. He's allowed 5 home runs in his last 2 starts. Nick Sandlin gave up 2 runs out of the pen. Same for Tim Herron. He gave up a run. But then the back end of the pen, Cade Smith, Hunter Gaddis, and Sam Hentges combined to go 3 1/3, 2 base runners, 5 Ks, and no runs. Those guys got it done. Jose Ramirez, you can't stop the guy. He is absolutely a fire hazard. Goes 2 for 3 yesterday, his 16th homer of the year. He scores 4 runs. He knocks in 2. He walked twice. He is just absolutely scorching hot, doing everything right. One guy who'd been ice cold of late, Josh Naylor, and Josh Naylor breaks out in a big way. We know Josh carried the offense in April. He'd been very cold in May, especially the last 2-3 weeks. But last night he busts out of his slump, goes 2 for 4, hits 2 home runs, knocks in 5, scores 3 runs. He also drew a walk, so he's got 16 home runs on the season. 15 home runs. So Jose Ramirez and Josh Naylor have 31 home runs between them. And David Fry, again, his 7th home run of the year. He went 3 for 5, 3 runs, 3 ribbies. The middle of that lineup, again, Jose Ramirez, Josh Naylor, David Fry, combined to go 7 for 12, 10 runs, 10 ribbies, 4 homers, 3 walks, no strikeouts. Unbelievable. Andres Jimenez had 2 hits, 2 runs scored. He stole a base in this one as well. 3 hits for Kyle Manzardo. Big game for him, which was fun to see. He had a 2 doubles and a single, 3 for 5 with a run and a ribby. Bo Naylor had a sacrifice fly in this one. Arias had a sacrifice fly. Tyler Freeman, who's been hot, didn't do anything in this game, 0 for 5 in the leadoff spot. Will Brennan 1 for 4. But overall, a great night for the lineup and a chance to win the series tonight, win yet another series, and get to a season-high 20 games over 500 with a victory. The Guardians will begin action today with a 3.5-game lead over Kansas City, who's dropped 3 in a row, 6.5 up on Minnesota, and 10 games up on the Detroit Tigers. With the Yankees losing last night, the Guardians move back into the top spot in the American League. Again, long way to go. We're 55 games in at the 1/3 point of the season. Only the the Guardians are 37-18. The Phillies have dropped 3 in a row. The Phillies are 38-18. Phillies only a half game better than the Guardians for the best record in all of baseball. So it's possible by the end of today, the Guardians will have the best record in all of baseball if they win and the Phillies lose. Again, I don't know that matters that much now, but it's a whole lot of fun to talk about. There's no doubt about it. For the Guardians, the final game of this series against Colorado, the pitching matchup, Logan Allen and Ty Block for Colorado, which is a big advantage for the Guardians. Day off tomorrow, and then a weekend home series against Washington. Stephen Kwan expected to play again in Columbus tonight, be off tomorrow, and hopefully be back in the lineup with the Guardians in the leadoff spot on Friday. We'll keep our fingers crossed on that one. When we come back, we're going to talk with Field Yates of ESPN. That's next. Where else but the bullpen with me, Adam the Bull, brought to you by BetRivers. All right, welcome back. It's the Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by BetRivers. And now we're talking football, of course. The great Field Yates of ESPN is with me. Always good to have him. Field, how are you? Thanks for joining
great.
me.
Yeah, it's always good to catch up with you. We were talking about this before we got going. 99 days until the NFL season, and there is a great debate that is raging right now. Do you want those 99 days to fly by because football will be here, or do you want time to slow down to a crawl because, at least in the case of you and I, we live in locations where we don't get a lot of good weather, so we got to enjoy it while we have it.
Yeah, it's funny because when we were talking about that, I don't, for whatever reason, because football is your career, I was like, he probably wants the summer to go fast, but you're the opposite. No. You want to appreciate the summer. I respect that. That's
we want to enjoy it. I got 2 young kids, and my oldest is she's now become like just obsessed with the pool. She's only 2, but she loves the pool. So I hope that we'll have lots of time in a pool somewhere this summer. So if you've got one out there and you live in Connecticut and you want to invite us, let us know. We'll be there in a jiffy. But yeah, we're really enjoying these very precious sunny days that we have because, of course, before you know it, it'll be back to about 40 degrees and it'll be snowing for 3 months straight, and we'll be yearning for summer again.
And I can tell you from experience, it's always good to get the kids in the pool early. This way they're comfortable swimming.
Yep.
That's a smart
100%.
move. So you're ahead of the deal. And the truth is, let's face it, even though the games are played the games that matter are played starting in September, football has become pretty much a year-round sport. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of weeks here and there where there's not much going on, but you think about it, the announcement of the schedule,
I know it,
is a bigger deal than almost anything else in any other sport.
It's an amazing. Oh my gosh, yeah, and there are a lot of different ways to define a legacy of a commissioner, and there's much more to Roger Goodell's legacy than just the schedule release. But I will say the efforts he has taken to make football a 365-day-a-year arrangement, as you're discussing right now, might be amongst the most notable things that he has done because, we're about to enter a relatively quiet period. Let's call it like June 15th to about July 25th or so. That's when camps kind of roll back around. And in between those 2 dates, there's the chance for franchise tag negotiations, although I think there's just one franchise tag player.
Yeah, you're right.
That's T. Higgins, who hasn't had a new deal taken care of. So that's going to be an anticlimactic deadline. There's the supplemental draft, which like once every 5 years a guy gets drafted. Other than that, there's not a whole lot going on. And yet what's going to happen during those 6 weeks is you're going to have a bunch of programming all over the place, including at my shop at ESPN, talking about things like, can the Cowboys get over the hump this year? Are the Chiefs going to become the first 3-peat Super Bowl champion ever? Because even if there aren't events taking place, the matter of fact is that people love football more than every other sport. And if that means that we are squeezing some football discourse in during the NBA Finals, that's okay.
Yeah, it is. And the NBA's hurt itself here, although the Minnesota did win last night. But they might have if it ends in the next game, it might be a week off between the semifinals and the finals.
Yeah.
I do want to talk some fantasy with you too, because obviously that's become, in a way, really become a year-round thing too. When I first started playing fantasy football, I don't know, late 90s, I guess I started playing, or mid 90s. Yeah. Obviously I'm older than you, but that it was just, okay, you got a magazine in August or something, and then you drafted, and we maybe did stats by hand the first couple of years. But now, not only do I do redraft leagues, I'm in a keeper league. I'm in 2 dynasty leagues. So I'm making trades, and I know not everybody does that, but the diehard football lunatics like me, I'm playing fantasy football year round, not just real football, fantasy football.
It's the best. Yeah,
I love it.
I think about 3 things specifically on the sports calendar, and there are certainly many more, but 3 things that I especially care about that I find, I call them sticky: fantasy football, the NFL draft, and the NCAA tournament for basketball. Those 3 things, largely year over year, don't change a whole lot, right? The NFL draft has shifted in terms of the number of rounds and the number of minutes involved, but it's not like the NFL's instituted a lottery reform or you can't trade picks or things like that, right? The NFL draft every year is 32 teams, 7 rounds, supplemental picks included. And next thing you know, there's 250 or so players taken by teams, and we have renewed hope and optimism for teams at the bottom of the barrel, right? Year over year. Fantasy football, the same thing. You can make any customization to scoring that you want. Yep. You can have every catch by a tight end count for 2.65 fantasy points if you'd like. And yet ultimately, at the end of the day, what fantasy football is about is those 18 Sundays and Thursdays and Mondays, and I guess Saturdays, Fridays, and Wednesdays now as well, where you get to sweat it out, right? You and I are facing off head to head, and I need David Njoku on Monday Night Football to score me 12 fantasy points to get the win. Yeah. If he doesn't, I get the loss, right? That's the beauty of fantasy football. And so I think that's contributed to the year-round interest, is that you know that you don't have to shake it up, right? Like, all we got to do is get to the season, and we'll be able to enjoy this beautiful thing that is fantasy football. So the year-round nature to it is only good for not just the business of fantasy football, but also the business of the NFL.
And to me, fantasy, like, I don't even care about the money I win. I care about the bragging rights. I want to be able to have one up on my buddies or my colleagues and say, I'm better than you. I beat you again. That's the thing I care about the most.
More so than anything else. It's pride, right? And that's maybe a ridiculous thing. And I'm sure, my wife heard me say that when I'm talking about, like, the money I got to contribute to various leagues that I'm in during the preseason. She might want to put her hands around my neck and say, what the heck's the matter with you here? That being said, I do believe that, the pride is so fun. Like, it just, that entire offseason, you get bragging rights. And, those bragging rights might go away the following year, might go away by week 2 if you realize your team stinks the following year. But that's the beauty of it. It's so fun. And I know this sounds like a little bit of a goofy way to describe fantasy football, but I've often referred to it as a community, because the leagues that I play in are like various different rings of my life, right? I've got my high school buddies, I've got my college buddies, I've got my work friends, I got my buddies who I live in the same town as. I've got, people from all over the map that I'm involved with through fantasy football that, candidly, I don't keep as much touch with during the off season, just because, I've got 2 young kids. A lot of my friends who I play with have a bunch of kids as well, right? Like, we're in this unique cross section of our lives where, there's not a lot of disposable hours during the week, but fantasy football gives us something that we can kind of tether ourselves to within that circle and feel really good about reconnecting with people that we don't spend as much time talking to for the 7 or 8 months of the off season.
No doubt. And we've kind of, in some of my leagues, we've gone to trying to do them on like Zoom or something, because it used to be back in the day, right? You get together. But, now that doesn't really happen as often. So we kind of do, Zoom in that way. And, it's funny, Field, because I'm thinking about the potential 18-game schedule that they're talking about in the NFL and the double buys, which is obviously smart to go double buy if you're going to 18 games. And I said the other day on my TV show, I said, if they go to double buys, they can't have buys, last few weeks in the season, because it's going to screw up fantasy football. And there's one guy on my show who's not a big fantasy football player. Everybody else is. And he kind of giggled. And I said, you may giggle, but the NFL is going to take that into account, because fantasy football is a nice chunk of why the sport is as popular as it is, I believe.
I completely agree with you. And we're seeing more, as I mentioned earlier, we're having like these isolated games, right? We've got we got 2 Wednesday Christmas games. We've got a Friday game in San Paulo in week 1, which there'll be plenty of interest in Packers and Eagles, 2 big brands, and it's week 1 of the season. But as you know, we get to like that lean portion of the schedule where it's week 13. You've got a 4-8 team hosting a 3-9 team. And like, who's really interested in that? Oh, how about the person that has DeAndre Hopkins on their roster, right? That unequivocally equals more fan interest, in my opinion. So it's a good point on that 18 plus a double buys. They better be mindful of it, because they were not this year, specific to week 14. Week 14 in a lot of leagues is the final week of the regular season. 15, That's 16, and 17 is when people play their playoffs. Maybe even some people play 15 and 16 is round 1, 17 and 18 is round 2. But week 14 this year, 6 teams on a bye, 6 on a bye, and notable teams as well. Right. The NFL had 2 last year. I believe it was the Commanders and the Cardinals who were on a week 14 bye last year. And even just having 2 teams gone was impactful. So there's going to be some serious navigating of bye weeks in that week 14 as a week 14 schedule. And I know you can't draft your team in August for what it's going to look like in week 14. That being said, like, you got to be a bit more mindful than you have been in prior years.
Field, I want to talk about let's get specifically to the Browns here with Deshaun Watson.
Sure.
And certainly fantasy players. I mean, Deshaun Watson's kind of fallen off the radar the last few years in terms of fantasy. And I think certainly Browns fans are hoping that he becomes fantasy relevant again, because that will mean he's good. If you look at all like the most talented teams in the NFL, wherever you put that dividing line, after 8, I don't know where it is, but the Browns minus quarterback are, I think, as talented a roster as any team in the league. But at this point, I don't know what to expect for Deshaun Watson. When the Browns traded for him 2 years ago, I celebrated. I was on the air when the news broke, and I was like, for the first time, maybe in franchise history, the Browns have an elite quarterback. This guy, before the everything that happened, he looked like he was the second best quarterback behind Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, he's been suspended, he's been injured, and frankly, he's been pretty bad when he's played for the most part. Do you have any hope, and should Browns fans have any hope, that he can still be, if not the quarterback that we saw in Houston, anywhere close to it?
I have some hope, but it obviously decreases by the year, right?
No doubt.
Even though he is ostensibly a little bit healthier, although the comments from Kevin Stefanski recently that talked about kind of like the management plan for Deshaun Watson weren't exactly what I wanted to hear. I kind of was hoping he'd say in June or May, I should say, hey, Deshaun's good. We're fired up. It's going to be 100% this season, at least going into it. So I'm mindful of the fact that he has to manage that shoulder issue further going forward. That being said, there is some hope, because I don't know how much precedent there is for a player who I believe at the time of the trade was 27, maybe 26, 28, somewhere in that range, 26 to 28, who up until the trade had been, as you mentioned, objectively one of the best players in the NFL, who a couple of years later, including the fact that he did not play, obviously, for a full season in Houston. And then, was it 12 games, 13 games in Cleveland for the first year? 11, excuse me.
Yeah.
12 weeks, 11 games.
Right.
So that's a, nearly 2-year hiatus, but still, it's not like Deshaun during those 2 years took a bunch of hits that contributed to it. It just feels like a player who perhaps has lost all the confidence in himself that probably contributed to him being, a college champion, college football national champion, and then obviously a very, very good player with the Houston Texans. So I don't know the answer in terms of how likely it is that he gets back on track. I just know that at this point, if the Browns hadn't done as masterful of a job building the roster around him as they have, we'd be talking about that trade as potentially one of the worst of all time. There's certainly time for Deshaun to turn this around. He's got 2 more seasons under contract, 3 or 2. This is year 3.
This is year 3. So
year 3, so 3 more, excuse me.
Yeah.
So there's a chance for Deshaun to flip the narrative here a little bit with the Browns in this trade. But do I think it's possible? Absolutely, I think it's possible. But I can't tell you with certainty what I know what's going to happen, because it's been a mystery man. He's been a mystery man since the trade was consummated 3 years ago.
It feels like it's this year or never, right? I mean, in my mind, I still, I was 100% certain when they made the trade, and now I'm 50-50. He's still going to be good. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if it doesn't happen this year, I'm going to be 90-10. It's not going to happen, or maybe even higher, because I'm just going to assume it's not going to happen if it doesn't happen this year. And honestly, since the Browns have a first-round pick next year for the first time in a while, if he's a disaster this year, they got to think about drafting a quarterback, which is crazy, but they're going to have to.
Yeah, they have to think about it next year, which I'm sure there are Browns fans listening to this right now. You can't talk about next year.
I know.
He's one of the most fascinating players. If you made a list of players that have a chance to be amongst the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL, he's on that list. There's no two ways about that, right? I mean, the player that we saw in Houston, it was not some aberration. It was not some player who got the job done with smoke and mirrors. He was objectively outstanding. He was an unbelievable vertical passer. He was a precision passer, good athlete as well, impacted the game with his legs, clutch production, excellent leader, all the things that you're looking for. So is it possible? Yes, but it's not the same as an athlete who's fading into age, right? But the further removed we get from the 2019 Masters, the less likely I feel like it is that Tiger Woods is going to win another Masters. You know why? Because a lot of guys, it's a young man's game, right? So Deshaun, it's not the age, it's just the production. And it's a production game. And the further removed we are from that 2018, 2017 season for Deshaun Watson, 2019 is, I guess, really all the way up into the trade. But, since he 2018 draft, 2017 draft, excuse me.
Yeah.
The further we are from the brilliant moments we saw in years 1, 2, and 3, then the less likely they are to recur, just because the history of sports tells us that.
Yeah, that's true. All right, I got a few more things on the Brown field, but before that, one other quarterback that's kind of in a situation where you're not sure either. and it surprises me. Aaron Rodgers. Now, I'm not going to lie. I find him very irritating, and so I'm kind of rooting against him and the Jets. And I grew up in New York, so a lot of my friends were Jet fans growing up, and I grew up a Bengals fan, and I cover the Browns now. So but this assumption that if he's healthy, he's going to be great again, to me is nuts. He might be. I get it. He's an all-time great, but he's 40 years old coming off an Achilles tear. I don't think it's a short thing. He's still going to be a great quarterback. Do you?
Well, it's not a sure thing. I mean, he had 26 touchdown passes to just 12 interceptions his final year with the Packers. The variable that I think has to be weighed here, which, it's a little bit anecdotal, and I think some people put more stock into this than others, is yes, he's 40, but he's also 40, coming off of an Achilles tear, trying to prove the doubters wrong, right? And there's this very scary thing that we do in sports, and I think we're kind of alluding to this a little bit with Deshaun as well, which is counting talent out too early, right?
Yeah.
I want to be the guy who's around too late to count out the prize fighter for making one more comeback, right? Because those are the takes that when you get them wrong seem like those are the ones that sting the most, right? Those are the ones that stick with you the longest. So Aaron has a prove it year, but I mean, talk about inflection point seasons. Aaron, Deshaun, two of the names that are most notable in that regard. And Aaron said it recently, like and bluntly as well. If I don't play well this year, we're kind of all gone, right? Do I think it's possible? Absolutely. I mean, I mentioned that a couple of years ago, 26 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Well, the 2 years prior to that, the guy was the back-to-back MVP. So it's possible, but is it a sure thing? No, especially because, that Achilles tear, obviously, that is most likely, just a one-off thing. That's most likely just terrible luck. But 40 years old, just like staying healthy in general, is harder to do than a 25-year-old. It's just like a little more elastic and springy at that point of their NFL career. And the Jets' offensive line is much improved, but still potentially two starting tackles in their 30s. Those guys have to stay healthy. Olu Fashanu, the 11th overall pick out of Penn State, certainly helps the Jets. But the offensive line, it looks good on paper. We got to see it perform.
Right.
If it doesn't, then it may not matter for the Jets.
I feel that the AFC North, every team finished over 500 last year, despite the fact that Deshaun Watson barely played, despite the fact that Joe Burrow missed a ton of games, and the Steelers essentially had no quarterback the entire season. I think, in my mind, the Ravens may be a slight step back in terms of their defense, in free agency. But with a healthy Burrow, in theory, a healthy Watson, and the Steelers, no matter what you think of Russell Wilson, he's better than what they had. I mean, I think on paper you can make the argument that going into the season, I hate to be prisoner of the moment, but I feel like you can argue this could be maybe the best division I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's certainly on the short list. Yeah, it's on the short list. And, the Steelers feel a cut below to me.
Yes.
But they still find a way, right? They did again last season. As we know, what's the infamous 18 straight years Mike Tomlin has been a head coach and they've never had a losing record. So there is a deference that going back to that dynamic I just mentioned, right? I am now, and I was a year too early last year. So I am retired from the business of saying the Steelers streak is coming to an end this year. I'll be a year too late on suspecting it to happen. That being said, if all these teams stay fully healthy, that's going to either result in one or two of them separating from the other two or three, or it's going to result in sort of the cannibalization of the division in which everybody kind of hovers around 500, and there's no team that emerges with, that first round bye with the number one seed. So it's so fascinating. I mean, it's just such a reminder that, we get on these coaches and GMs, and I understand that's part of our job, no doubt, for decisions they make. Circumstances drive so much, man. I mean, you could be the third best team in the AFC North this year, miss the playoffs, and maybe even have like a one game above 500 record, and people are going to crush you. Meanwhile, 9-8 might be good enough to win a different division this year. I mean, the NFC South looks better, but I'm not sure it's dominant this season. So sometimes right time, right place really does matter in the NFL.
Man, the Chiefs are obviously the Chiefs are the best team in football. Right? But you expect the Chargers to be better with Herbert and Harbaugh, but the Raiders and Broncos both don't look good. They're in such a great spot. It's a big advantage. Field, when it comes to Nick Chubb, obviously everybody's excited to have him back, but We don't know when he's going to be back. He's coming off a devastating injury. He's not young, obviously. I look at him, most guys, it takes them over a year to come back from a serious knee injury. Adrian Peterson came back the year after and had, I think, his best year, one of his best years. To me, Nick Chubb is Adrian Peterson-esque. I think some people look at that as sacrilegious, but I believe that. I mean, I've watched Nick Chubb every carry he's had in the NFL, and I'll admit I'm biased, but I think he's the most talented back in the league when he's healthy.
Yeah.
So you never know. But if anybody could bounce back in this NFL from that injury, I think it's Nick Chubb. I don't know if it's going to happen till the middle of the season, but I still think he's got good play in him, like top-notch play at some point.
Yeah, three factors
tough?
Here is one. I think it's a much different injury than what Adrian Peterson had. This one's
that's
a
true.
lot more complicated than that. That was and I hate to sound like an ACL tear is ever not a big thing, but that was a clean ACL tear for Adrian Peterson, right? This is a complicated multi-ligament injury or multi-issue injury for Nick Chubb. So that has to be factored into play. Second of all, the team has been very open about at some point during the 2024 season. I should say really what they've been is non-committal. It's a fly on my Zoom camera right there. The team's been very non-committal about when Nick Chubb specifically would be back. And then last, I talk about this frequently. Follow the money, right? I mean, the team had to take a pay cut to, that was like an $8 million haircut, right? So expectations in my book are a bit more tempered than yours. Am I going to count? Of course, I would never count them out. One of my favorite players to watch, as you mentioned, perhaps the best pure runner in the league right now. But I do think that I look at it like this: whatever the Browns get out of Nick Chubb this year is gravy to me. I think it's going to have to be, sort of a cumulative effort between Deontay Foreman and Nyheim Hines and Jerome Ford. And if they add somebody else, it's going to have to be backed by committee. I should say Pierre Strong as well in there. Nick Chubb to me is the icing on the cake.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, and that's good analysis. I admit I'm a little biased in the situation. The guy's the most selfless player I think I've ever met in my life. If you have 53 Nick Chubbs, you're gonna win a lot of football games. He is all that's right about professional sports. Final thing, Browns defense.
Yeah.
On the road, they were terrible last year. At home, they were historically good. We know what happened in the playoffs. C.J. Stroud just tore them up. What is the real Browns defense? How good do you think they are heading into this season?
Yeah, I think they're awesome. I think they're legitimately terrific. I couldn't quite figure out the home road splits last season. I feel like the game that maybe stuck out to me the most was when Gardner Minshew rocked him for 33 points, right? This crazy game, and Josh Downs scored on the first drive of the game, like a 75-yard touchdown. You're like, wait, what? The Colts are doing this with Gardner Minshew? I think they're the real deal, though. I think they're much more a reflection of that home defense than they are that away defense. So I'm going to buy into that for sure with the Browns. Another year in the system, largely kept the core intact. Defensive attrition this offseason was minimal. I just think this defense has a chance to be even a little bit better with the addition of Michael Hall in the second round, beefing up perhaps the biggest vulnerability on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm going to buy into the Browns defense. If there are areas they're going to have to require them leveling up, it's that every year that you have an exposure to a defense, you have a little bit more film, right? It's like go to the batter's lineup a second time, but the great defense is proven. It doesn't matter. Anytime, any place, any Sunday will do it to you. So I think they're the real deal, extremely well coached, and I think that if things go how I expect them to, then not only will Myles Garrett have a real shot to once again be Defensive Player of the Year, but Schwartzy might be on the the head coaching radar at the end of this season.
Are you a Celtics fan, by the way, Phil?
I am, yes.
Are you confident that they can beat probably Dallas or Minnesota? And do you want Dallas because of the Kyrie Irving thing?
Yeah, I'm agnostic towards the matchup. I don't sound like a coach here, but I respect both of those teams. They get the job done in different ways. I think they can win. Yeah, I do. I feel good about the Celtics. They have start to finish this season have been. I hate to sound like just a cliche, but they have often found ways to win, and they have not really lit the lights. Lit the gym up with their 3-point shooting over the past couple of rounds. So if they find their footing once again with that, which was a hallmark of their regular season, watch out. I mean, they were so dominant, 60-plus wins, and kind of coasted the last month of the season because they were that far ahead of the curve. So feeling good about the Celtics, and I would love to see it. Have a lot of respect for really the entire roster, but Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, two guys who have done a lot of winning, who still get a lot of flack, a lot of mental toughness required to continue to come back Jaylen Brown especially, who this year had a couple of moments where he signs the big contract. Everybody laughs at him for that. Goes to the dunk contest. People laugh at him for that. And yet he keeps finding a way. And he was terrific during the Eastern Conference Finals.
Final thing, when you compete against your other ESPN colleagues, who do you take the most pleasure out of defeating?
In fantasy football, I'm assuming that's the question, right?
Yes.
Good question. Probably my buddy Jeff Darlington. He's too pretty to win at fantasy football. So JD.
Field, great stuff, man. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on.
Great stuff talking with Field Yates of ESPN. Thanks to all of you for joining me. Thanks for watching. Please give me the thumbs up, subscribe, like, do all those things. I really appreciate it. Thanks to Monzo for producing. Again, thanks to Field Yates for joining me. Also, make sure you check out the BetRivers app. Think you know who's going to set the tone for the game? Make the bet at BetRivers, and you get an extra bonus with the first bucket bet and get. Place a wager on who will make the first bucket of any NBA playoff game. When you do, BetRivers will give you a profit boost to use on another bet. See the BetRivers app for full details. That's the BetRivers app for the first bucket, bet and get. I'll talk to you next time. Live show Thursday at 2 p.m. Where else but right here? It's the Bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by BetRivers. See you, everybody.